Very good morning to everyone, and a warm welcome to one and all who has joined us today. I wish you all a very happy new year. I'm Tasneem, and I am the moderator for the session today. First of all, thank you so much for joining us on a Saturday morning. As you all know, our in-house research team have started interacting with our investors directly in the recent times. One such session was about PowerSip, where we received tremendous response both to the event as well as the product, and I would like to thank each one of you for welcoming the product. Today, we have another interesting session on equity markets, and the topic is what should you do with your equity exposure? It will be hosted by Mr. Arun, who is the head of research team, and he will be presenting on this topic. Before I hand over the floor to Mr. Arun, I request all the participants to post your questions in the chat box. Once Mr. Arun finishes the session, your questions will be answered. Over to you, Arun.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Tasneem. And hi everyone, thank you so much for joining. So without much further ado, I'll just begin the presentation. So broadly, if you really look at it, the last 1 year has been really dramatic, both in terms of all our personal lives as well as what happened in the market. So you had a period in March where the markets were down 40%. And post that, there was a very strong rally close to around 80-85%, depending on whichever segment you had invested in. So net it ended we ended the year with somewhere close to 12 to 13% returns in equities. So this is very unusual for such a sharp correction, and also for such a sharp upside, all happening within such a short span of time. Because historically, while these corrections are normal and the recoveries are normal, they usually take a slightly longer time frame. So this is leading to a lot of questions on should we be concerned now, because the rally is also been strong, but there are still some lot of uncertainties around. So how do we handle our equity exposure at this juncture, right? So in this session, what we will try to address is, it is not to give a precise answer saying this is exactly what you should do, but the broad idea is to take you through how we are thinking through this. So it's not about saying this is right, that is wrong, but just the idea is that, can we provide you with a thinking framework, and then you can decide on your views, and if you think within the framework it fits in, and then it can help you in making much more informed decisions, rather than just getting emotionally swayed by the markets, whether it's up or whether it is down. So let me start this. So the first question that all of us have is a very simple intuitive thing, that hey, the markets are at all-time highs, and should we kind of sell our equities or reduce the equity exposure because it's at an all-time high. Now this is a natural thing, right? So it's not just you, even I have the same fear every time there is a all-time high, because it's human intuition that something goes up. And we also remember that in the early 2020, when there was a market high, there was again a correction. So it is natural that somehow we start connecting a market high with the possibility of a market correction. But let's just step back and look at, is it something that we should really be scared about? So the first simple logic is that, if you really look at any asset class which grows, let's think about a real estate, and let's say you buy a flat for 50 lakhs. At some point in time in the future, it will go to 60 lakhs, it will go to 70 lakhs, it will go to 80 lakhs. And all of us know, over a long period of time, the asset class will grow. And at some point in time, it will stagnate. But yeah, but in the longer run, it will go. So which means at 60 lakhs, again, for the particular house that you bought, it's an all-time high. At 70 lakhs, again, it's an all-time high. Same thing happens to gold. So any asset class which grows over the long run, an all-time high is inevitable. So Nifty 50, which is nothing but the top 50 companies in India, which represents roughly the equity returns over the long run, from 1990, has given roughly around 13 to 14% returns. And this is in underlying, this reflects the underlying earnings growth, which is also more or less around the same number. So as long as you think Indian companies will continue to grow their profits over the next 10 years, there will be several market highs going forward. So let's say today Nifty is at 14,000, At some point in time, it will go to 15. At some point, it will go to 16, 17, 8. It is natural because if we expect the earnings growth to go up, now what time it will go, we do not know. But the whole idea is that, so an all-time high is a given. So if you are investing for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, we will have to go through several of these all-time highs, because without touching an all-time high, the markets can't go up. So if you really look at all the red dots, they show all the periods where there is a market all-time high. So the all-time high doesn't mean that it has to crack, but it is a natural part of any asset class that is growing. The next thing that we did was just to break the same thing again. If you look at each and every year, we just said how many number of days does the all-time high hit. So if you really look at the period between 2003 to 7, that was the golden era for equity investing, where all investors made somewhere close to 45-50%. Even if you invested in the worst fund ever, you still made 50% CAGR. Okay, I'm not even talking about a total return. It's like each and every year people used to all funds, all index fund, any fund that you picked, even if it was the worst fund, you would have still made somewhere close to 45-50% kind of a return. So if you really look at it, all those years had a lot of all-time highs. So if you got scared by one of these all-time highs in 2003 and stepped out, you would have missed the entire rally. And look at the last 10 years, almost every year. 2013 had 2 all-time highs, 2014 had 54. So the point is, all-time highs is a given. Next year again we'll have several all-time highs. Post that also we'll have. So the whole point is, all-time high is a given. So we don't need to really worry per se too much about an all-time high. And same thing, we this is not just for Indian equities. As I told you, it's a mathematical thing. Any asset class which grows will automatically have a lot of these all-time high. So look at S&P 500. This is the US index. You can see that throughout its journey from 1950s, it had a lot of these all-time highs, which are marked by red. So first and most important thing, all-time highs are absolutely natural. And if somebody has to participate in equity and make money, equities have to go up. And the more they go up, the more the all-time highs that we'll all have to handle. Okay, the next thing that we decided was, now the other question is, now we know all-time highs are okay. So, but again, the fear is that, hey, every time an all-time hits, maybe the market will correct immediately, and post that again, it will hit one more all-time high. So let me move out the first time it hits an all-time high. So what we did was very simple, because whatever was said and done, it's always better to see the actual data and get ourselves convinced. So what we did was, we took the last 20-year period from Jan 2000, we took Nifty 50, and then we said, had you invested in all these all-time highs, okay, we said, what is the next 1 year return going forward, what's the next 3-year return going forward, and what percentage of the times were they belonging to different segments. So we found that 73% of the times, which is almost 3 out of 4 times, your 1 year returns was positive. So there is no proof to say that if you invest in an all-time high, the markets will correct immediately. Again, 86% of the times, the markets were up on a 3-year basis. In fact, the best part was, almost 50% of the times, your 1 year return was more than 15%. Okay, so first thing first is that, one, all-time highs are super natural. There's no way without an all-time high. Basically, it means the asset class won't grow, which means you won't make money in equities. And two, we have seen the historical data which shows that 50% of the times you make more than 15% returns, even at all-time highs, and almost 3 out of 4 times you make a positive return over the next 1 year. So there is nothing to worry about an all-time high. Okay, now the question is, if we don't have to worry about all-time high, what should we actually worry about? Okay, so the whole point is, all-time highs are not responsible for the markets falling, but there is a secondary layer. So all-time high is just, sometimes they coincide with those other factors which are leading to the fall. But the key point is, we don't need to per se worry about all time. They are neither bad nor they are good. They are just a natural part of the process. So this is the first most important point. Now the next question is, okay, I don't need to worry about all time highs, but what should I really worry about? Just give me, yeah. So the way we really look at markets is that, if you look at the long period of markets, overall, if somebody just invests and then lets it ride, we all know that over a long period of time, the markets go up, and broadly it reflects the underlying company's earnings growth. So as long as companies, top companies in India continue to grow their earnings, net over a 10-year period of time or a 15-year period of time, the whole thing, the markets will reflect the underlying earnings growth as the returns. Okay, But we've also seen that within this whole period, while that's like a telescopic view, internally, if you really look at the markets, they go through 4 different phases. One is a bull market phase where the market continues to grow with along with the earnings growth. But sometimes what happens is when this bull market phase happens, the markets become very, very expensive at some point in time. That is, people extrapolate, they start thinking making money is easy, and then we go into something called the bubble zone, where the valuations become expensive, the earnings growth is at its top, and the sentiments are very, very were extremely exuberant. So there are 3 things. One is valuations, earnings growth, and sentiment. Once these 3 factors start becoming like extremely, extremely exuberant, that's when we go to a bubble zone. Then some negative event hits, then the market bursts, and which means that it falls by 10-20% initially, and then it falls by another, maybe then it can go up to 30, 40, 50. Worst case in 2008, it went even up to almost close to 60% fall. So that's the best place. But usually we have found that if you invest at a 30% or a 40% or a 50% fall, the amount of money to be made is phenomenal. So there are 4 phases for this market. Now, luckily for us, 80% of the times the markets are normally valued. They are either in a bull market or in a flat market. Okay, they're neither in a bubble nor in a burst kind of a phase. Okay. Now the whole point is we will have to be really careful if we get into a bubble, because the we saw a bubble in .com where it was down by close to almost 56%. In 2008 there was a bubble where it was down by almost 60%. This COVID, I wouldn't call it a bubble because the valuations or the earnings growth or the sentiments were not too exuberant. It's just that it's an external event, and any point in time the COVID had hit, the market would have corrected. So the COVID could have hit in 17, could have hit in 18, could have hit in 13. Any year it could have hit, right? It's just an event where none of us have any control over. But the other bubbles had formed over a long period of time. There were a lot of signals in the market, right? So the intent for us is we should not be worried about all-time highs, but the key thing that we should be worried about is, are we in a bubble zone? Okay. Now the idea would be simple. If we identify a bubble, we step out of it, the market crashes, and then we enter. Now, honestly, this is how I thought out. I was just thinking 10 years back, but then I realized that there was a problem, right? Which is like, how do we identify the bubble? Because that's the holy grail, right? If we can get it right, then we are all sorted for life, because we will be able to step out of a bubble and we'll have phenomenal returns in equities. Now, let's look at what is the challenge. So most of us will end up thinking we can do it. So that's exactly how I was also thinking. But let me give you some data points on why this is probably much more difficult to do in reality. So this is a blogger called Jay Boorman. So he does a very interesting analysis in Twitter. So you can also check at Jay Boorman. So what he does is he looks at all the big guys. Okay, these are like the Sachin Tendulkars of investing world. Like, what are they commenting each and every year? So you can find that almost each and every year, right from 2012, somebody or the other gives a call saying the market is in a bubble and it is going to crash. So Bill Gross, who was called the god of debt markets in US, again he said the equity is going to fall, and then Mark Faber says the stocks to end the year at 20% lower. So the whole point is you will always find that there is some very, very large guy globally who's calling for a market bubble. Okay, and you can see that all these guys have been wrong for the last 10 years, right? And again, now these are names probably you wouldn't recognize, but this is a name which all of you recognize, and I have a very personal attachment with this particular warning, because Raghuram Rajan gave a crash warning in August 2007, and I had one of my clients who sent me this. Then the point is you can't answer it, right? Because like Raghuram Rajan is warning, and this is just a normal Arun. So it is like at one end Sachin Tendulkar is asking you to play a particular shot, and I am just a street cricketer, and then all my view was that it's very difficult to predict a bubble, and a lot of people have got it wrong. So while the logic might be right, the markets are inherently very complex. So it's not like there is only one way solution. There are 100 outcomes out of which one or two play out. So be it Raghuram Rajan or any other expert, it is very difficult to get it done. So unless and until we have a proper plan and a process, we will completely go for a toss. And we all know what happened after 2014. So the client unfortunately took out some money based on this warning, and for the next 3-4 years the markets went up, and at 17 he got a little worried, and then he entered back into mid and small caps. Then again the 18 19 mid and small caps crashed while large caps started doing well. Until then large caps were not doing. So net the whole experience became really bad. Not that why? Because see, it's natural. It's not that I'm just saying Raghuram Rajan is bad or something. But the whole point is all of these guys are very popular guys, right? So the whole point is the key point is not to say these are not intelligent people or not. It's just that they are fantastically intelligent, but even these guys get it wrong. Okay, now JP Morgan went one step ahead and then they did one more analysis where they said, had you listened to all these guys, all the biggest Sachin Tendulkars of the investing world, and had you taken your money out, okay, and put it in debt, what is the opportunity cost? The cost was almost like 30 to 60% loss, which means that even today, if market cracks to 30% or 40% or 50%, you are still equal to listening to them, right? So the whole point is the market has just gone up, disappointing them for almost 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, and mentally it's very difficult when you are out of it and everybody around you, the market continues to go up. Psychologically, it just is very painful. And it's not just in so all those were previous instances, maybe we might not remember, but this is exactly what happened in March as well. You found that Ray Dalio, who's like the world's best hedge fund manager, he said this is bigger than what happened in 2008. There's another guy called Mohammad El-Erian, who's again one more great hedge fund manager. He said, don't read too much into stocks sudden rebound. So had you listened to them, not that they are bad or something like that, just that the fact that it is just very difficult to get the bubble call right. So first and foremost, the most important point that we wanted to emphasize is that if all of these guys have got it wrong, then from Funds India or be it Arun, then we can also get it wrong. So the first point is that we don't want to tell that we will be able to correctly come out of the market, correctly get into the market. So this all in, all out approach is not something that we will follow. So the first point that we will do is we will stay humble, and what we will do is that's the essence of a debt allocation. So the first, but the second most important point which I want to tell, the first is all-time highs is not something to worry. The second most important point is don't completely go by one of these experts because we know the track record. But the whole idea is always build a humility net, which is that you always have something into debt. So let's say if you're running a 100% equity portfolio, I would kindly request you to at least bring it to let's say 70 or 80% and keep something in it. While debt might not give you great returns, there's always a safety bucket required. But for most of Funds India clients, we maintain it around either 70% equity or 50% or 30% or 10%, depending on each and everybody's risk profile and all that. But broadly, there is an asset allocation where there is some bit into equity and there is some bit into debt. The whole idea of debt is that whenever equities don't perform, you have the other basket from where you can deploy money, or which can give you the much required protection in terms of the fall is not as much. So that is the asset allocation's basic approach, is because what you saw in the last few slides, it is unbelievably difficult to move in and move out of markets. So what we will do is that we will so that doesn't mean that we won't take calls. We know that 10% of the times markets goes into extremes, and sometimes the signals are very evident, while the timing might be on and off by 1 or 2 years. But at the same time, we will want to protect some of your equity allocation and bring it a little more, make it a little more conservative. But we will only take this during extreme times, right? And even during extreme times, at the max, we will go up to 50% lower in your equity allocation. So let's say you have 10 lakh portfolio, 5 lakhs in equity, 5 lakhs in debt. That 5 lakhs in equity, we will cut only up to 50%, and that too in two stages. First leg, we will cut 1/4 of your equity allocation. Second leg, we will ask you to cut another 1/4. Now, when will that happen? That is what I'm going to explain, saying when we will ask you to cut. Okay. Now, the key point is, how do we decide when to cut? We will decide based on three things: valuations, earnings growth, and sentiment indicators, right? So these are the three things. If all three are showing a red signal, then we will definitely ask you to cut the exposure. But otherwise, given what has happened in the last 10 years, we will not just last 10 years, last 50 years, in terms of how people predict and get it wrong, we will always want to predominantly participate. And that's exactly the reason why initially itself we build a debt layer, so that because otherwise, if we knew it will be only 100 equity, when it's going bad, it will be 0 equity. So that's the way we are going to approach it. I'll tell you the framework. Okay, so when will you actually go underweight equities? The logic is very simple, that if you think the equity returns of the next 5 years is going to be bad, you might want to reduce your equity allocation. And if you think the next 5 year equity returns are going to be great, you might want to increase equity allocation. Now the question is, how do I know what is the next 5 year equity return? So equity returns are very simple. If you forget the noise, what is coming in the news and what the experts are telling and all that, if you just simply break the equity return, they come into three components. The primary component is earnings growth. So if the earnings growth of all the companies grow at, let's say, 15% over the next 5 years, which roughly translates to 100% earnings growth, absolutely. So it means that you will roughly get 100% plus. The second point is the valuation change. So sometimes the valuations might be high when starting, which means that valuations might come down to average. Sometimes the valuations might be super cheap, like in March, which means that you will get the valuation kicker also. So with that earnings growth, you get the valuation kicker. Either it can be positive or negative based on what is your starting point valuation. Then the third part is the dividend yield, which is roughly around 1.5%. So the dividend yield component is known. Okay, historically it's always been around 1 to 2%. So which means 1% of your returns comes from dividend yield. So to calculate the next 5 year future equity returns, so don't worry about the all-time highs, all that the people tell on TV. Don't worry. All you need to ask yourself is, hey, what's going to be the next 5 year earnings growth? What's the rough number? What's the valuation? Will it detract from that number, or will it add on top of the number? The dividend yield is anyway 1% every year, right? So that's so all we need to do is figure out the earnings growth and valuation change, and then we will get the equity returns. Now, obviously, it's in future, and the prediction part is where the difficulty comes. But why does this framework work? Because this is simply based on pure mathematical logic. So just to give you a sense of why this works, if you really look at these are the 25 companies. We've just taken the 25 companies based on companies which have got like reasonably very good returns over the last 25 years, and you can see that this column, that is before the column before the last column, you can see the numbers. Okay, and this is the actual stock price returns, and the next column you can find the underlying earnings growth. So you can find more or less they are very close to each other. The only difference comes because of the additional valuation, either adding on top of it or detracting on top of it. So roughly the key point to remember is that finally, because we are investing in funds which underlying again invest in 20, 30, 40 companies, whatever is the aggregate earnings growth of your portfolios, that is more or less the returns that you will get, plus or minus the valuation changes. So this is not theoretical, this is pure math, and this is how it purely works across the countries in equity. That is all that you need to know about equity investing. So let's look at how this works historically. Okay, so let's look at 2000 to 2005, the 5 year returns. You got 8% returns. Okay, now how do you split the 8% returns? You got 2% from dividend yield, you got 18% earnings growth, but the point is the valuations again dropped it down by -12. So 18 minus 12 plus 2, roughly you get the total return. Again, look at 2005, 2010. You see 22% was the market returns. Your earnings growth was 10%. Your P re-rating was, again, the valuation gave you 11%. So 10 plus 11, 21, and then approximately plus 1.5%. You roughly got around 20 to 22.5%. Again, 10 to 15, the same logic. Again, 15 to 20, the same logic. So as I told you, all that you need to know for the next 5 year returns is that what will be my earnings growth, what will be my valuation. Is it going to pull it down, or is it going to add returns like in FI not 5 to 10? And then the dividend yield, either way, we know it's around 1.5%. So that will be our total return. So the key number for us is earnings growth and the valuation number, whether it's going to go down or go up. Okay. So the other way to really think about this is, because otherwise we get confused, the way is to really think about it is like somebody who is jogging with his dog. Okay. Now the earnings growth is the jogger. Okay. In the next 5 years, where he'll be, the direction will finally be determined by the person who is jogging. But in the near term, if you look at the dog will go front, the dog will go back, and it will be very confusing. So if you start looking at the market purely in terms of the dog, you will get confused. But if you take a 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour view, which is nothing in market parlance, if you take a 3 year, 4 year, 5 year view, it really doesn't matter whether the dog goes up or down. Finally, the guy will hold the dog and he will catch it. He'll take it forward over the next 5 years or the next 5 hours. Okay. So all we need to see is the earnings growth going to go up or is it going to go down? The valuation, the dog might sometimes go like extremely forward, which means that it will detract from the way in which the guy is running. But otherwise, if the dog is more or less around the guy, then it's still fine. Okay. So this is how we have built the framework. Okay. Now the first question is, what is the earnings growth? Because we've now found out the logic that all that is required to know is what is my next 5 year earnings growth. Obviously it's a rough metric, and then we need to know what will be the valuation chain. Once I get these two, I can roughly get a sense of how much to expect from equity returns. Okay. So that's how we will be looking at this. Okay. Now see, the point about earnings growth is, now there is no mathematical formula in which I can precisely predict the future, but the way in which it is worked, we can study from history, saying that it's like it goes through cycles. So there are periods where it goes disproportionately high. So you look at this 24% CAGR from 92 to 97, and post that it takes a breather. So it's like the guy runs at 24 kilometers per hour for some point in time, and then he takes a break for another 5, 6, 7 years. Then again he goes for 24% return, and again he goes for a long break. So the last 10 years has been an unusually long break. So usually these breaks continue for 5, 7 years. So ideally by March 16 or 17, we should have had the next leg of earnings growth coming up, which is why a lot of analysts and yours faithfully included, we all got it wrong. Now, why did this happen? We need to understand, because if we don't understand this, we won't be able to get the next earnings growth kicker, which is going to come at some point in time in the future. So the broad base is set that say, hey, this is a cycle, and which means that at some point in time in the future, the earnings growth is going to surprise us big time. But now the question is, why hasn't it come? Because logically it should have come in 17. Now the idea is that we also need to understand why it didn't come, and if the what are the reasons, and if those reasons are satisfied, then it means we must be prepared at some point in time in the future to be surprised by the earnings growth, which is a good thing for all equity investors. So if you really look at the base is very, very low, because this is the return on equity, which is what the amount of money that the companies make on the total equity invested. So broadly, if you look at it, the numbers were somewhere close to 25% plus in 2008. Right now, it's at the bottom, which means companies are not able to earn much on their invested. And this is again a cyclical company. Every time it goes down, it again jumps. So we are at a very, very low base, which is again comfortable to us, because all this means that whenever it turns, the earnings growth can be super duper compared to the averages. Again, this is one more phenomena via which you can see how low the base is. So you can see in 2001, when the base was low, the earnings growth picked up. And this is called the PAT to GDP, which is out of GDP. What is the entire India's corporate profits? What's the percentage? At some point in time, it becomes excess. So whenever it becomes excess, we should be worried. So if it crosses, let's say 6%, then we should be worried. This is when a bubble normally happens. So this number going above 6 and your valuations being extremely high, then we have to be super worried. Then we will ask you to cut equity allocation by approximately 50%. Why? Because then it's a deadly combo. You have a high earnings growth, so the guy can get tired any point in time. You have a valuation growth, which is accounting for this high earnings growth. So it's a double whammy. When both of these go for a toss, then you end up with very, very poor returns over the next 5 years. Right now, the advantage for us is that it's at an all-time low, right? So and we all know what happened in the last time when it went to these numbers. So this is history. So, and this is always a cyclical component. Again, we expect this to move up at some point in time over the future. Again, if you look at credit growth, again, it's at all-time lows. It's at 6%, while in that peak, it was at 25% plus. It was almost touching close to 30%. So again, this is not indicating any bubble. Again, capacity utilization at the 2008 peak was almost high up to 92. Right now, it's at 47%. Capacity utilization, nothing but what percentage of the overall companies are utilizing their capacity. So which means that only 47% of the, if let's say I can produce 100 units of a car, I'm only producing 47 cars. So it's saying that there's still a lot more leg for me to produce. I just need the demand to get back. When demand gets back, my profits, everything will jump dramatically, right? So this is also showing no signs of a bubble overall. So now the base is set. Now the key point is all this was true also 3 years, 4 years back, but somehow it did not translate into earnings growth. Now, what happened in the last 5 years, that why is this cycle a little more getting delayed? The key reason was Raghuram Rajan came in 14 and then said, hey, banks, you guys are messing it up big time. None of you guys are reporting properly. So all you guys have to report all your bad assets properly. Then suddenly everybody started reporting and all the cockroaches came out of the board. And almost for 5 years, the entire PSU bank pack and the corporate banks, which is banks which lend to large industries, the infrastructure segment, everybody had to show up for their bad lending activities. And then it meant that the profits were completely beaten down for almost close to 5 years. So you can see these numbers that in 13, 14, 15, the banks per se, the corporate banks were making close to 52,000 crores in profits. Then it came to 11,000, 14,000. Then it became 31,000 crores negative. Then it became 20,000 crores 2 years back. Now this year it's expected to be around 17,000 crores. So this whole so they're still yet to reach their March 15 profit. But the point is, the worst of this is behind. There's some more, maybe the COVID related issues left, but most of the banks have already provisioned because they were expecting it to be a lot more bad. But thankfully, it's not been as bad as they expected. But the good point is, since they had expected and they are already prepared, the impact is supposed to be far, far lower. The other impact which happened was because of demon. And then you had RERA, and then you had GST, and then you had an NBFC crisis post, which a lot of them were not getting. A lot of smaller companies were not able to borrow, and a lot of us, or a lot of normal people like us, were not able to borrow for buying our TV, fridge, AC, and all that. Then there was a collapse in commodity prices, and then the interest rates were also much, much higher. So corporates were borrowing at 7-8% returns, which is exactly what we also got as returns from debt funds. And also finally COVID hit. So it's a very rare 5 years where you had a sequencing of almost every problem hitting you year after year. After every 6 months, you had something or the other hitting you up. So it's a very, very rare sequence, because of which it got delayed. Now the key question is, what has changed? So the first thing that has changed is the banks, which are very, very significant in terms of the contribution to profits, that problem is more or less getting done. So at a low base, because they were negative, whatever becomes positive, the earnings growth might look disproportionately high. Why? Because the base has been set very, very, very low. As you saw, the last 10 years, you have hardly moved. So it means, let's assume your salaries have stagnated for 5 years, and then suddenly when there is a salary hike to compensate for the 5 years, you will suddenly find a large salary hike, right? So that's exactly what is happening. The other segments was auto got impacted due to some regulatory. There was a BS4 to BS6 transition. The GDP growth was low. The NBFC crisis led to people not being able to borrow. So overall, auto was going through a lot of problems. Now it's the numbers are picking up dramatically. One, because everybody wants to buy a vehicle just for protection, and also all the numbers, both rural is also been improving. So auto is more or less out of the problem. Commodities also, all commodity prices have started to go up in the last 3-4 months. So this is again a huge positive for this. So two of the major segments, again, corporate banks is getting solved, auto is getting solved, commodities, the bad is behind us, and energy prices, oil price had also collapsed. Now they are more or less stabilizing. So the worst part is behind us. Again, if you look at healthcare, pharma was going through tremendous issues because US was putting a lot of regulatory barriers, and a lot of companies were getting shut down, because they said shut down in the sense temporarily. They were getting orders saying that US FDA said, hey, you are not following the proper procedures, and hence you'll have to close. So right now, because they also found that India is the largest producer of a lot of these medicines, the more and more they cut Indian supplies, they are also getting impacted. So right now that portion is also sorted. So you can see all pharma stocks have rallied in the last 1 year, and we think that bad part is also done. Industrials is still some time away, but government is giving a lot of incentives and a lot of schemes like a production linked incentive, and then, but still it's some time away. But again, the worst part is done. Telecom, all of us know what is happening now. It's only Bharti and Jio left. So at some point in time, the worst of telecom is also behind us. Vodafone is anyway gone for a toss. So overall, broadly, the bad things that have happened is more or less getting to a close. That's the key difference between what is happening 3 years back and what is happening now. And apart from that, what we saw was this quarter, while the sales was down, the profit was up 17%. Now, how can profits go up in a quarter like this? The other good part is vaccine is around the corner. There's no second wave. Possibly right now it doesn't look like there's a second wave, so it looks like COVID is under control. So, and the numbers of corporates is also going up. How is it going up? So one, corporates had a significant tax cost saving advantage, which came from three things. One, the taxes were reduced from 30%, they were reduced roughly to 22%. This is much before. So in 2019 itself, this was a huge positive, but after that COVID hit, but net they had this lower taxes, so which means corporates pay lower taxes, and then they started cutting the cost dramatically. So they would have IT companies would have cut travel expenditure, all the other expenditure they've cut, and this is across industries. Okay, and then this led to huge margin differential in almost all the segments in the last 1 or 2 quarters. So this is the quarter before, and this is the new quarter. So you can see across industries the margins have improved, which is why there's a sharp improvement in profits. Again, you found that the interest rates are also far lower. All corporates are able to borrow at 5%, 4.5%, which is phenomenal, and which is also getting reflected in lower debt fund returns and FD returns going forward. And the other point, so these were the three things which helped the corporate in terms of cost cutting. Okay, the other point is what is leading to increase in demand because the interest rates have come down. A home loan for, let's say, 50 lakhs, you would have paid 43,000 a year back. Right now, you only need to pay 38,000. So roughly you have saved 5,000, which again can go into a car loan, which is around 10,000. Let's say a car loan for 10,000. Half of the car loan, you can just benefit from the reduction in interest rate. So net, a lot of people look at EMI as a basic parameter to purchase a lot of things. So this number is also coming down. On an aggregate, a lot of people can buy a lot more things given the interest rate fall. And then this is also getting reflected in the real estate sales. Mumbai saw 8-year high in terms of the sales. There's a dramatic pickup. There was also some stamp duty reduction and all that. But I think a lot of state governments will start to follow the same template to revive the real estate, because real estate is a significant component of reviving the Indian thing. And we are seeing very strong signs in real estate because the housing loan rates are the lowest, the affordability across all the indices are the lowest. So everything is coming into place also for real estate after almost from 2012 real estate has been stagnating. So that's a strong thing. The other thing we noticed was all the big companies are getting far bigger. So if you look at the last 1 year, they've all taken up significant market share. So while all the small companies got impacted because of high interest rates, because of NBFC crisis, because of COVID, because of all these, the big guys have just gone about and then are done really well, which is finally also a particular reason why the stock market seem to be doing a lot better, because the big guys are becoming much bigger. Again, government has also given a lot of land reforms, agree, but again, these will all take 1 or 2. The most important thing is a PLI, which is production linked incentive, and this is where you encourage a lot of industries. You give them saying that you produce so much, and I'll give you a lot of. This has worked phenomenally well in mobile phones, because of which Samsung's, Apple, and all the other major companies have come to India and started their manufacturing unit. So this is expected to be a big game changer for India. But again, this will play out over the next 3, 4, 5 years. But stock markets being stock markets, they will start to put a lot of this into the current price expectations immediately. So this is a big positive for manufacturing. So on the demand side, there are a lot of things happening. So overall, what is happening? The base is low, the worst events are behind us, and there's a lot of factors which are falling in place. So our broad sense on the earnings growth is that we can look at an above average earnings growth, which is like, let's say 12% is the historical average. Our sense is that we should at least go for a 12, 13, 14, 15%. And most likely it can be even higher than that and surprise us just like what it did in 2003. But the base is set, which is that I do not know whether it will happen next 3 months, 4 months, 6 months. But if you look at all these numbers and you think this is fairly a good way to look at it, our sense is that earnings growth numbers are going to be reasonably high over the next 5 years. So which means, let's say if we get 15%, it means we will double in the next 5 years. If it is if it's 12%, it means we'll double in the next, which means 100% earnings growth over the next 6 years. If it is 10%, it means 100% over the next 7 years. So let's assume 12 to 15 is a fair range, means 100% earnings growth in the next 12 to 15% on an absolute basis. Now the key is valuation. So out of this 100%, how much will the valuations take? Because valuations are already at reasonably high levels. This can be a drag. So I don't think valuations can be a plus. So which means out of the earnings growth, the valuations will eat away some returns. Now, how much is the valuation? So one, if you look at P, it's super expensive. It's at 27 times. Long term is around 19. So definitely expensive. But the point is in valuation, the whole idea is you should always look at 2 or 3 parameters so that you get a good picture. When we'll have to be scared is when all the valuation metrics are pointing towards the same direction. Now let's look at what is PB showing. PB is only at a historical average. So historical average is 3 times. This is now at 3.1. So this is a valuation metric which is showing that, hey, there is still not to worry because the earnings growth is yet to pick up. Why is PE getting distorted? Because your earnings are depressed. Now, again, if you look at MCAP to GDP, which is what Warren Buffett uses, it's at 100. Is it cheap? Of course not. 75 to 80 is the average. But is it super expensive? Is it exuberant? No, because 149 was where it crashed in 2007. Okay. So is it cheap? No. Is it super expensive? No. Is it expensive? Yes. Again, this is another metric which compares it with the bond yields, which is nothing but your interest rates. Again, that shows that it is nothing abnormal compared to history because you are at lower interest rates. This compensates for the slightly higher value. So broadly, if you look at it, 2 of the valuation metrics are saying it's average. One is saying it's high. P is saying it's exuberantly high. Okay, so the key context is that the central bank has also done a phenomenal job in putting a lot of money. So what they did in 6 years for 2008 crisis, they did it in 3 months. Okay, for 6 years they took for adding 3 trillion. In 3 months they added 3 trillion, and no wonder the stock markets are up. So you can look, not just US central bank, all the central banks have given a all-time high kind of a excess money printing which is gone, and this money printing is leading to almost 18 trillion dollars of the world's bonds are in negative bonds, which means that you buy the bond and it's like you invest in FD, then you pay the bank for taking your FD. So that's how bad it is. So which means 18 trillion dollars in Indian market is somewhere close to 2.5 trillion. So you can think about it. There is so much money sloshing around, which is saying that even if I get anything 0% return is also great. So this kind of a money will eventually follow India. So that's exactly what is happening because of the central banks on this side. And they've also told that they will continue for at least 1 year till their inflation goes up above 2%. The valuations might stay slightly higher. So this is a context that all of us will have to remember. So overall, our sense on valuations is that it's definitely high, but not at an exuberant level. And the central banks will keep continuing to keep it at a slightly higher levels for some point in time. So till the central banks are showing some sign of weakness, we will have to get used to this slightly higher elevated valuation. But that being said, if the valuations go extremely high, we will obviously need to start cutting the exposure. Last, coming to sentiments, one of the sentiments we look at is dollar index. Whenever dollar comes down, all emerging markets become reasonably cheap because then the currency problems are not there. So this is again like more people get scared, they move into dollars, which means world is becoming more safe or more scared. The more the dollar comes down, it means world is getting ready to take more risk. And this is getting reflected in the left hand side part where the FIIs are going left, right, center in Indian markets, while us as Indian investors are moving out of the markets. Now, who is right? Obviously, when should we be worried? When both Indian investors and FII investors are going gung ho, that's when it shows a classic signs of a bubble. So everybody wants to get into the market. The valuations are super high. The earnings growth is at super high. Now, again, this is not happening, thankfully. And you might say FIIs are blindly getting the money and putting everywhere. No. If you look at all the other countries, the interesting part is that only India has got money in the last 1 year. Only India. Philippines has not got India. So it's not like FIIs are crazy that, hey, I have money, I'll put everything in all the emerging market countries. No. They are seeing something in India because we have reasonably at lower point in earnings growth. So for them, given their low return expectation, India becomes a super play. So our sense is that the FII flows can continue for an extended period of time. Again, if you look at bubbles, usually you see that the returns are phenomenally high. While the last 6 months it's been high, if you look at a 3-year, 5-year return, it's only 12%, 13%. In 2008, it was 45% plus. There were funds which were giving 65% CAGR. So we are nowhere close to that kind of a bubble. Again, IPOs is one more indicator. So in 18, it was around 81 IPOs and almost 1 lakh crore raised. We are still nowhere close to that. So this is again an indicator which is nothing to worry. So overall, the sense we are getting is, except for the stock market participants who are directly investing, the young crowd which is investing, except for that, we are not seeing any major signs of euphoria. But again, the retail participation is a problem, and US markets for sure is more or less in a bubble. So we are seeing all signs of a bubble: high valuations, high earnings growth, and a significant sentiment. So US is definitely more or less in that bubble territory, but at least India per se right now is still a long time away, unless and until the earnings growth picks up and then the valuations goes disproportionately high. We are still at an okay place, right? So the summary is very simple. How do we finally take the call? So this is a framework that you can use. So first, usually what used to happen was I used to look at only the left. If valuations were high, I used to move out. Valuations were low, I used to overweight. Then I realized that the key point is the earnings growth, and the valuations are only secondary to that. You remember the guy with the dog? I earlier used to look at only dog. Now it's like the guy becomes the first priority. So right now our sense is we are at bottom of earnings cycle. So you can take your call. We have shown the data. So let's say you think it's not bottom of earnings cycle. You can correspondingly think what is your view based on that, right? Right now we think we are at high valuations because, as I told you, two metrics are normal. The third metric, MCAP to GDP, is high, and PE is extremely high. So unless and until everything goes high, so what is our next call? So right now neutral. So what does this mean? Now, if you are a 50% equity, 50% equity, 50% debt kind of equity allocation, simply stick to it, right? So because of the equity upside that you saw in the last 1 year, your 50% might now be 60%. So what you can do is the 10% excess that you've got, profit book it and bring it back to 50. Now, should you go to 37 and a half, don't go right now, because the point that we will look at is when does it cut the very high valuations? Because right now we don't see us going for the underweight stature, because unless and until earnings growth, we will not go completely underweight, but we might go marginally underweight if the valuations, let's say today, let's say there's another 25-30% move with nothing happening to the earnings growth, then we will have to go marginally underweight. So this is the framework that we use. So overall, summing it up, we are at the bottom of earnings growth. The valuations are high, but not yet, they have not reached very high. When they go to very high, we will have to cut the allocation, and there's a mixed signal in terms of sentiment. So right now we are at neutral, but this is something that we'll be circulating every 1 month. So you can look at this. There'll be a 3-pager which will be sent to you. You can look at what is the signal showing. If it goes to moderate underweight, please cut your equity allocation by 1/4 and move it to balanced advantage fund. You can move to debt, but again, debt might become a little dangerous if you want to get back in. So balanced advantage funds will solve that problem for you, because even if you panic out in the future stages when markets go down, the balance advantage funds can automatically bring it up. So as a second layer of protection, we want to move towards balance advantage. So right now, we are still not hit the trigger one, which is the marginal underweight portion. So whenever it goes to that very high valuations, we have an internal metric of close to around, we track around 26 parameters, out of which there are 4 valuation parameters. If those 4 valuation parameters show us that it's going very high, we will give you the signal saying that it's good time to cut your. But right now, the only action point is whatever is your original allocation. If you're 60% equity or 70, whatever is your starting allocation, if the allocation is exceeding 5% from your starting allocation, please reduce it back. So there's no nothing wrong in some profit booking to reduce it back to your original intended allocation level. But our sense is based on our framework, because again, I might get biased, I might have emotional thing and all that. But whenever it cuts it, we will ask you to cut it to a lower level. And within equity, we think value as a strategy and mid and small cap as a segment is very, very reasonably valued. So within equity, again, you can play it a little more conservative. So compulsorily have this as a part of your 5-finger strategy. So right now, the final call is simple. Whatever is an excess allocation, bring it back to your original allocation. Wait and watch. If the trigger one is cutting, it might cut or it might not cut. We do not know. But if the markets again insanely go up for the next, let's say 1 or 2 months. If it goes up without nothing happening on the earnings growth, then the trigger one will get cut, and we will be asking you to reduce your allocation by 1/4. So if you're 50% allocation, you will reduce 12.5%. And let's say if you are 30% allocation, again you will let's say you're 40% allocation, you will reduce 1/4, which is you will reduce 10% and move to balance advantage funds. These are the balance advantage funds that we are currently recommending. So these are so this is exactly how we are thinking through the whole thing. And yeah, so that's broadly what I wanted to communicate to you, that this is so just to really think through it. It's just a framework to think through it. Now if you have any different, obviously it's a view, right? You might have a different, but the framework remains the same. So all you have to take a call is, what is my earnings growth expectation? What do I take a sense of the valuation? Based on this, you can take a call. Now you might not agree with me saying that this is not bottom of earnings, maybe earnings might not be there, but that is an individual call that you take. But please don't go by the all-time highs. Just use this as a mental framework. Finally your returns will be dependent on what is the earnings growth over the next 5 years, and what is the valuation going to add or subtract on top of it. Thank you so much, everyone. We can just open it up for the questions.
Okay. Thank you, Arun, for this informative session. Now let us start the Q&A session, and the floor is open for questions. I request everyone to put down their questions in the chat box. So we have the first question from Mr. Gemini Mittal. Does it mean that despite poor earnings, growth valuations are at all-time high, and how it is not a point to worry?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So the way to really look at it is this. So right, high valuations, it's not like will it always be okay? No. So based on, so let's say the call that we are taking is that it is at the bottom of earning cycle, because as I told you, the way earning cycle really works is that it's a cycle. Okay, so if you really look at one second, I'll just show you the so the way is, if you look at it, so in 2003, nobody believed that earnings growth will move up. So it was stagnating for some point in time, and then it again shot. Then for the last 5-10 years, it has been stagnating. So there are two ways to look at it. Now you can take a call saying that, hey, last 10 years has been 5-6%, and hence the next 10 years will also be 6%, or go by history and then say that there'll be periods of high growth followed by slow growth, which is how it's historically worked. Okay, and again, mutual funds, again, they'll reasonably be able to pick companies which can grow at slightly higher rates. So our explanation was that broadly our sense is that based on all the parameters, our call is that we are at the bottom of the earning growth, and this cannot continue forever, and we think everything is falling in place. Now if you are taking a different view saying that, so the way to think about it is, hey, last 5 years is bad and hence the next 5 years is bad, then most likely we might go for a wrong. So how you have to think it is, if you think the next 5 years is going to be bad, if you think we are already at the top of earning cycle, then you have to go underweight, right? So this is, as I told you, this is our view. So the same high valuations becomes dangerous when we are at top of earning cycle, or we are in the middle of earning cycle. So this is a view that you will have to take. So right now, our view is that we are at the bottom of earning cycle because of low interest rates and all the factors that we discussed. We are thinking. So if so, there is nothing right or wrong, Mr. Gemini Mittal. So all that we are saying is that this is our framework, and this is how we are. And then we have also shown you the data. So if you think, if your view is that, hey, the earnings growth can't come and then it will be, then you have to definitely go under it. So this is a framework which will be common, and based on your views, you can apply it and then you can take a call. But as a firm, this is the view that we will be going ahead with. Yeah.
Thank you, Arun. But Mr. Gemini Mittal also has another question. He's asking like what overweight and underweight signifies in summary. Overweight means time to buy more into equity or otherwise.
Yeah, so overweight is essentially that. So let's say you are somebody with a 50% equity allocation. Overweight means that usually you can a lot of people will allocate some portion of debt, saying that the another 50% in debt, they'll allocate, let's say 20-25%, saying that if markets become very cheap, I might want to tactically move in, and then I might want to take advantage of the prices, let's say something like in March. So when we are overweight, what we do is we give a call saying that, so instead of 50% in equity, you can bring it to 60. If it becomes very, very cheap, so marginal overweight means you can bring it to 60, and maybe like if you're extremely overweight, you can bring it to 70. Right. So the whole idea is that overweight is that if valuations are low in the same conditions, let's say market tomorrow cracks by 30%, instead of 50, we might want you to go for 70. Now that whether it's 70 or 65 will again be based on individual preferences. But the idea is that it can be a lot more higher than what you normally have in equity. So that's the logic of overweight and marginal overweight.
Okay. Thank you, Arun. And the next question is from Mr. Sundar. He's asking, like, given the lower interest rates and inflation, should we expect much lower returns on equity on a go-forward basis?
Yes, Mr. Sundar. So if you really look at it, the final determinant of the future return expectation always starts from your FD rate. So if your FD rates, let's say, or debt fund rate returns last 5 years was somewhere close to 8%, and right now it is at close to around 4-5%. So maybe initially you might still have some. So the last few months we had the valuation kicker, and maybe for another 1 or 2 years we might still have the earnings growth coming in. But the only problem is the valuations have already taken a lot of the returns from the earnings growth. So our sense is you might get, let's say, 100% absolute earnings growth over the next 5 to 6 years, but the valuations might take off, let's say 20% or 30% from that, depending on where we are. So but if, let's say, valuations become very, very high and then they knock off 50-60% of the earnings growth, then there's no point, because the debt will give you roughly around 30. So let's say around 5.5% is what looks likely at this juncture. Maybe it might go up after a year, we do not know. But right now the rates at the debt funds and at the FD rates, what we are seeing is around 5.5%. So roughly, I think that whole if somebody says that equities will give you 15-20% returns, I think that is a blatant lie. I don't think we are looking at that kind of an environment. And because the whole global world is only looking at 1%, 2% kind of a number globally, if we get around 13-14% returns, the foreigners will just lap us up like crazy. So we will all go through a phase where we are confused, saying what are the foreigners seeing in us. But we have to remember that for them, even 1%, 2% is a hard ask, because they are getting only negative returns for a lot of their safe assets. So even if they make 5% post risk post currency adjustments in India, they will be more than happy. So which means roughly, eventually, if valuations continue to go up and all that, we will roughly end up with slightly lower so that 15% and above, I think is a fairly tall ask. So anything between 10 to 13%, and again, there are pockets where there are very, very cheap. So value as a category is super cheap. So if you play it really well, you can still end up around that 10 to 13%. But again, there'll always be volatility. There'll always be this thing. But yeah, but the return expectations are definitely to be on the lower side compared to the past.
Yeah. Thank you, Arun. The next question is from Mr. Raghunath. He's asking, is that trailing PE or forward PE?
That is the trailing PE. The forward is currently factoring in almost like 30-35% growth because of the low base. So we have only taken the trailing PE. The forward is somewhere close to around 20 to 21 times, based on whichever is the. But again, forward is always, like, we found it to be a little iffy, because we really do not know. So we look at trailing, which is much more fact based.
Okay, and Mr. Raghunath also has another question. He's asking, broadly speaking, how much influence does FII flow have on equity valuations in the Indian market vis-a-vis DII plus retail investors?
So earlier FIIs used to be a very, very significant component, but in the last few years, even DII flows have become very strong. So they're equally competing with them. So earlier, what used to happen between 2000 and 2010 was, whenever FII flows are going out, the valuations will crack, and whenever FII flows are coming in, the valuations will go up. Now the good part was, while the FIIs were not big buyers in 17, 16, 15, what happened was the DIIs were strong buyers. Now, because there was a huge wave in mutual funds over the last 5-10 years, or at least predominantly after the 2014-15 period, MF and DIA flows have also become equally strong. So the good part now is that even if, let's say, FIA flows become weak at some point in time and the market corrects for some reason, the DIAs have been taking out the money for some point in time for the last maybe 3, 4, 5 months. So that money can also drop in to support the markets at lower level. So overall, our sense is that while it can, obviously it will remain volatile because almost every year will have a 10-20% correction with new recents. That's like a normal behavior from equity markets. But this time I think, because so when we will be really worried is when DIA is also positive and when FIA is also positive. That means that everybody is super positive on the markets, which means that it's a scary thing. So that means valuations will be high, and usually that happens at the top of the earnings cycle, because then everybody will extrapolate 25% earnings growth, then there'll be high valuations on top of it, then there'll be that super right now FIA flows are important. They will definitely keep the valuations high if they continue to flow. But the good part is that DIAs can also support. If FIAs flow weaken and DIA flows again get back, then it can support like what we saw in 15, 16, 17. So net the importance of DIA is still very high, but at least there are, instead of a single legged stool, now it's a two legged stool. In fact, MF on one side and FIAs on one side. After 5 years, it will be like almost both of them will be equally strong. FIAs are slightly more heavier than the MF, but yeah, but the trend is clearly shifting where both of them become very important players.
Okay, thank you. The next question is we have from Mr. Srinivasa Raghavan. He's asking, like, he's having a 90% exposure in equity MF. So should I take out and put it in debt? My investment horizon is more than 5 years.
So, Srinivasan, so what we have really noticed over a long period of time is that with a 70-80% kind of an equity allocation, more or less over the long run, you will be able to mirror a 90% or 100% kind of an equity allocation. So our sense is it's not going underweight. It's not an underweight call, but as a broad strategy, we would suggest that you always stick to a 70% or an 80% kind of an equity allocation range, and keep that 20% or 30% as a buffer. So let's say if there is a market correction or something, you can always get back and then bring it back to 90 under lower valuation circumstances. But given the current market scenario, we would always we would say that it is better that you broadly have an allocation range of around 70 to 80% in equity allocation. But I mean, this is only for your case, but for somebody else who's already in 50, you continue with 50% equity and 50% debt. For somebody who's in 30% equity, 70% debt. So the asset allocation is primarily a determinant of what is the your underlying risk profile, because the lower the equity allocation, the lower will be your return, but also the more comfortable your journey. Similarly, the higher equity allocation, you might get higher returns. But yeah, in your case, I would definitely say that a 70-80% allocation can give you the similar kind of returns, provided every year you rebalance it back to that same 70% or 80% in equity. 90 is a little on the top, but again, the way to look at it is, if you have inflows coming, so let's say in the next 2 years, if you have a large amount coming in terms of your every month salary, or you have a large property sale and then you're going to get the money, then you can use that additional money to adjust it and not touch the existing portion. But broadly, I would say that if this is your retirement money, you have no cash inflows coming for the next 3 or 5 years, you can definitely, I would kindly request you to reduce your allocation to at least 70% or 80%, so that you keep some buffer. It's and because we have tested it over 30 years, a 70-80% equity allocation can easily give you very, very similar returns to a 100% equity allocation, provided every year you just regularly rebalance it. And if at all there is an underweight, we will let you know. At that point in time, you can slightly reduce your allocation. But the key thing is, whenever you reduce your allocation, you can for these kind of allocations, to bring it to your original allocation, you can move it to safe debt funds. But if you are moving for the underweight, that in the future, whenever we give the call, please move it to a balanced advantage fund. Okay, that is the only thing to remember. For underweight, for going to your original allocation, please shift it to debt funds. But if you are going below your underweight allocation, below your original allocation, which is based on the underweight, which we might give a call in the future if it happens, then the equipment to use is a balance advantage fund. So that's the key thing to remember. Yeah. So this is my that would be our view.
Okay, thank you, Arun. And there are a few other investors like Mr. Nishant, BJD, and Gemini Mittal. They are asking you to share the recording or the presentation on the email.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, okay. So thank you so much for that. And the next question is from Mr. Prabir Agnani. He's asking, how do you quantify the PE re-rating?
Yeah. So how we quantify the PE re-rating is simple. What is the PE starting, and then what is the PE ending, and then that percentage will become the PE re-rating. Now now the point is now whatever has happened. So in 2000 in March 20 it was very cheap. Now it's almost 27 times. So all if let's say the 80% returns that you saw in the last 6-7 months, I think predominantly it is because of PE re-rating from low to high. So when it is low, it's always better, but the PE re-rating always happens in a very short interval. Now again the PE can go down also. So when we're taking a 5-year call, the way we look at it is we assume that PE goes back to historical averages. Can it go to, let's say, 18, 19, 20 times? What can be the detraction in return? So let's say right now it looks like it's knock off easily around 3 to 4% kind of a returns from your earnings growth. So the key point is if earnings growth come at 20, let's say I'm just hypothetically saying, if earnings growth come at 20% because of PE getting back to average levels, you might knock off another 4-5%. So you might end up with 15% return. So let's say if earnings growth come at 15% returns and this PE derating knocks off another 3-4% or 5%, you might end up with a 10 to 12% returns, because again dividend yield adds up. Now fund managers might be able to give you a slightly higher earnings growth profile. So net the math would be simple. Now we do not know, again after 5 years the PE might still be at the same level, which means you will be able to capture the entire underlying earnings growth. But and if let's say if it goes above and then it becomes 50 times, I'm just hypothetically saying, because in Japan there's a time when it went to 60 times. So in markets it's not like this cannot happen, that cannot happen, but when we are building an expectation, we can only go by the history. 18-20 times is what Indian market usually trade at. So going by that, it means that from your earnings growth, the valuations are going to take off a 3 to 4% out of your earnings growth. So that is the key thing. Now, if valuations become very high and the scenario becomes that the valuations will take off, let's say 7-8% from your earnings growth, then we might go marginally underweight. So that is how we take the calls.
Okay. Thank you, Arun. And the next question is from Mr. KB. He's asking, like, should we reduce from large cap, multi cap funds or mid or small? Since you said mid and small is still reasonably valued.
Yeah. So broadly, if you really look at it, the way we look at the fund selection is in terms of 5 baskets, right? So the first basket that we call it the 5-finger strategy, right? So you can just look at your 5 fingers. You can open your 5 fingers and then see it. The smallest finger represents small and mid cap category. So that you can put it up to 20%. Now that is like that is super reasonably valued. So we think while it might be, obviously it will be volatile and it might go down 10, 15, 20% anytime over the next 1 year or next 2 years. But we think there is a very, very good chance of a very high return coming from the small and mid cap category. The second finger, which is the ring finger, stands for quality. Okay, so this is where funds like Axis, which are super high quality, but again they'll be extremely expensive. And last 5 years has been a super duper run for this particular category, because earnings growth was not spread out. Only few companies had earnings growth, and these companies were getting valued at 60 times, 70 times. So this is one more segment. So this is a segment where if earnings growth gets more widespread, if GDP growth gets back, this is a segment which might get slightly impacted. But again, this is another 20% of your portfolio. Again, the middle finger will be for contrarian strategies. Again, super cheap. So our recommended funds will have UTI value opportunities, iPRO value opportunities. We'll have Franklin Focus Fund. So all these funds were doing really bad a year back. And that point in time, we still included it because the way we look at it is it's a leg spinner who didn't have a good time in the last few matches because it was a fast bowling pitch. But we think at some point it might change. And thankfully for us, the last 1 year, iPRO Value Discovery has been a top performer, and the value as a theme globally is coming up, because last 12 years it's underperformed globally, and last 5 years it's underperformed in India. If the growth becomes broad-based, value can. So the third finger will be value. Again, that you can put 20%. The pointed finger will be for a strategy like which is a mix of blend, and they're neither too much value or neither are they too much quality. It'll be more like Mirae Assets, Kotak. They will follow this kind of strategy. And the last finger would be for the global markets, right? So global markets, US is getting a little expensive. So if you have there'll be a tendency to over allocate to quality and to global markets. So right now we would say, if you are reducing, see, right now do not reduce if you are at your original allocation. There's absolutely no reason to reduce. But if you are most likely you will be more than your intended original allocation, that reduction you can do it equally, or you can do it slightly more from the global basket and the quality basket. While ideally everybody is recommending global right now, we are really scared, at least on the US front. There is nothing wrong in a 10% or a 15% allocation, but yeah, but US is showing all signs of a good bubble forming. Now will it break in 1 year, 2 year, 3 year? I do not know, because there everything is there. Earnings growth is at the top. Your valuations are at the top, because the market cap to GDP is 180%. Okay, ours is just 100. And yeah, and the sentiments is going crazy. Tesla's stock is, there are people who are like who have settled for they're just leaving their jobs because of the money that they got in Tesla. So all the signs of a crazy bubble is forming there. So I would say that the segments to be slightly careful is on the quality segment and on the global segment. The other three segments are very, very reasonably valued. Mid and small cap and value, super cheap. So I think there is a strong return expectations coming from those two segments. But yeah, but if you go by past returns, you will miss it, which is why we ask you to combine all these five together, so that depending, irrespective of whatever scenario plays out, your portfolio on an overall basis will do extremely well over the next 3 to 5 years.
Okay, thank you, Arun. There is one question from Mr. Amit Kumar. He's saying that I'm a layman in all these. I understood these things to some extent. Please guide, what should I do now with my portfolio? I am sitting on cash. Please suggest that what should I do?
Yeah, so Amit, the first starting point is, what is your original asset allocation? So let's say if you had your original plan was to be in 50% equity and 50% debt, and right now for some reason you are only at 20, let's say 30% in equity, that remaining 20 you are over allocated towards debt. I think you should definitely bring the money back into equities, but again it can be in a graded manner. Now the point is, it's very difficult, right? Because you have seen it at 30,000 levels, 35,000 levels. So mentally it is unbelievably difficult psychologically to get in, because the worry is that, if let's say if I right now put my money in, and for some reason the market cracks by 5%, 10%, or whatever is the number, we do not know, and then it becomes really painful. So I think an intermediary solution is that to simply invest in a balanced advantage fund kind of a product, where if the markets fall, they will automatically increase, so that the headache of when should I enter back again can be solved. So there are two ways to do it. One, you do a simple STP, maybe 6-month STP, a weekly STP into value oriented strategies or mid and small cap strategies, but broadly ensure that all the 5 buckets are equally represented. Or the second option is, you can simply put it into a 3-month weekly STP into a balanced advantage fund. So we have 3 recommended funds. You can put into 2 or 3 out of those funds, and then this is a mid-path solution. But to stay completely out of it, it is very, very difficult, because I think your original intended allocation, at least you should bring it back to that. But otherwise, to stay completely out of the markets will become very, very difficult, because the corrections might happen, or it might keep disappointing you for a very, very long time, and at some point in time you might overextend yourself at a very, very higher level. And this is nothing wrong with all of us, because this is exactly what happened to the great Newton himself. So he came out of a bubble early, and then the markets went up, and then finally he entered the bubble at a late stage, and he almost lost 3/4 of his entire wealth. So there's nothing wrong in us feeling these, but I think the whole idea is to create more of a disciplined process, where we either do it through BAF, or you do it through a 6-month weekly STP. But don't put it at a one shot at these valuation levels. For existing investors, it's a lot easier, but only for incremental money, the decision making becomes a lot more difficult.
Okay. Thank you so much, Arun. The next question is from someone mentioned as Galaxy M30. His question is like, what kind of returns can be expected from debt funds, particularly short-term and corporate bond funds?
See, the way to look at debt funds is you don't even need to ask me. It's very simple. There's something called yield to maturity, which is nothing but, see, debt funds is very simple. The way to think about debt funds is you are lending your money and that borrower is going to pay you an interest rate for that. Just like how when you give to a bank, the bank shows you something called the FD rate, and then roughly that will be your returns, right? So what the equivalent in debt funds is something called the yield to maturity, or it is called YTM. So you can go to any fund, put the fund, and then go to any website, you will get the YTM for that. Okay. Right now, the YTM for most of the funds are roughly around 5%, 5.5%. So that you adjust for the expense ratio, mostly it will be around that 0.5% levels. So net, the return expectation should be somewhere around 4.5 to 5.5% for the next 1 year. But if you are in a much more 3-month fund or a 6-month fund, the returns can be even lower. Where there the YTMs are only around 4.5%. Now there's nothing wrong with the debt funds, because few years back these were at 7%, 8%. It's simply that interest rates have started to come down. So all that 7-8% returns that all of us enjoyed over the last 3 years, that phase is over. So there is, but the point to remember is that because the returns are lower now, do not increase your risk, because returns are always an outcome of the underlying risk. So the safe product gave you 8%. The safe product is giving you only 5% or 4.5 to 5.5% right now. But the point is, do not increase your risk because of these. It can be a temporary thing, but yeah, at least for the next 1 year, it will revolve around that YTM numbers. So I think unless and until the interest rates start to go up, which I don't think will happen at least for the next 6 months, unless and until the inflation completely goes out of whack, the RBI, at least till the whole economic recovery gets back, RBI won't be too keen on increasing the interest rate. So we will have to be content with much lower debt fund returns, FD returns. So all safe products in India will give you a much lower return for the next 1 year.
Okay. Thank you, Arun. The next question is from Mr. Somil. Firstly, he has appreciated for your session. Thank you for a great session. And I always admire great advices shared by Funds India managers. As the earning growth looks good for the next 5 years, it is a good time. Is it a good time to invest a huge lump sum amount in equity to get good returns in next 3 to 5 years? If not, what are the recommended strategies?
Yeah, so again, I would say that a huge lump sum amount, if you have, so obviously do not invest the entire thing into equities, because that will be like, that won't be the best thing to do. So the idea is again to start with the basics, like what is your original asset allocation? So if you are somebody, so how do we decide the asset allocation? So somebody says 50-50, somebody says 70 equity, 30 debt. The key point is that the more into equities, you might get higher returns. But as with everything in life, so somebody with a six-pack is obviously better than somebody with a paunch like me. But the reason why I don't want a six-pack, it takes immense effort, it takes immense dieting requirements from me. So similarly, higher returns come with the baggage that it will put you through a lot of mental pain. So it will go through a 20-25%. Equity markets every year will go through a 10 to 20% correction. That's like a normal. And once every 5 years, 6 years, it will take you through a slightly higher correction, maybe 30%, 40%, 50% kind of a number. And at that point in time, it will look really a struggle. So the whole idea to look at it is, what is your original asset allocation, which you decide based on the trade-off. This is the pain I am willing to take, but in the longer term, this is the gain. Just don't only look at the returns, because then you get misguided. Then you are like, returns are great, I'll go. But you should also ask, what am I required to put up for this outcome. So in that sense, you have to decide your asset allocation. So let's say it's 50% equity, 50% debt. The debt can be one shot lump sum. Okay, and out of the debt, you can demarcate, say 30%, saying that if the markets fall by 20%, 30%, 40%, I will allocate 20% of my debt of that allocated portion into equity, another 30% at 30% fall, another 40% at 40% fall, and worst case it goes to 50, another 10%. So this is the safety mechanism that you're building. For the remaining 50% in equity, you can split it across these 5 segments which I was saying, which is quality, value. It's called the 5-finger strategy. Any of our managers will be able to help you in that, but please do spread it across, because while the earnings growth numbers are fairly very comfortable to us, the valuations are also slightly on the higher side. If the valuations were, let's say, 10-20% cheaper compared to today, we would have definitely asked you to jump in. So let's say if it was at 75% or 80% MCAP to GDP, and all those valuation metrics were slightly lower than what they were today, we would have asked you to jump in immediately. But because there is still a lot of uncertainty in terms of the valuation number, we would ask you to split it on do it on a 6-month weekly STP, and then peacefully wait for a 5 to 7 year period, and net you will make a really good return, and overall your experience will be good, because one, your equity is diversified across those 5 different segments. So at all points in time, 3 segments will do well at each and every year. And the second point is, if at all the market cracks, you have some portion of your debt, which is 20 to 30% of your debt, which you can utilize that fall. So you are prepared for all scenarios. And the fact is, the valuation slight discomfort that we are having, that also you are averaging it out over the next 6-month period. So net it will be a very decent solution for you to make reasonably good returns over the over a 5 to 7 year. Now, should it be 50 or should it be 60 or 70, that you can have a discussion with your manager and then decide on your equity and debt allocation. So that's how I would go by it. Don't put the entire 100 rupees into equity, because that won't be the best way to approach it.
Okay. Thank you, Arun. The next question is from Mr. KB. He's asking, like, our interest rates are at 4%, but retail inflation effectively 8 to 10%. So how much can equity return going forward?
See, right now the inflation numbers are at 6.9%, which is the RBI's number, and RBI wants to bring it down to their band is 2 to 6%. Obviously, 2 to 4% is too much of a stretch. While they've kept it as a band, I'm not too sure whether it'll get there, and RBI also doesn't want there, but they definitely want it to be around that 4 to 6%. Now, the guidance that they've given is that the food price inflation will, and RBI is a reasonably good institution, and they're not very biased, or they don't give the fancy projection. So there is a lot of science behind them. And whatever I have seen from RBI, it's a very respected institution that we can go by their word. So they have clearly indicated that by the next 3 to 4 months, your inflation numbers will come to far lower levels. So they are expecting it to come below 5%, because their sense is that the food price inflation will come down. The key risk comes from the fact that commodity prices have started to go up in the last 3 months. So that is the only thing which RBI hasn't factored in. So that's the only thing that we'll have to look forward for. But right now, the broad sense we are getting from RBI is that the inflation numbers will start to come down, and for some point in time, they will be okay with a slightly higher expectation, as long as it is in the 5 to 6% band, because the economy is still not completely out of the COVID mess. We are still, while looks like it is in control, RBI would still want to wait it out for 1 more year, and unless and until things become normal, I don't think they will want to increase the interest rates. Or the worst case is that if inflation goes abnormally high, which right now at the juncture doesn't seem to be the case.
Okay. Thank you, Arun. The next question is we have from Mr. Shankar. His question is, agreed that the US market is in a bubble territory, but in view of the commitment by Fed to pump in liquidity, as long as it is necessary, the FII fund flow to EMs could continue for next 1 year easily. Am I correct?
Yes, Mr. Shankar. So US market in a bubble is a different case, but that doesn't really affect the FII flows. For the FII flows, I think emerging markets become an easy play for them because one, the dollar is also come down. So which means that if dollar starts to become strong, they will lose on the currency gains as well. So let's say Indian markets give them 12%, and then Indian rupee depreciates by 4%. Net net, they'll only make 8%. Now, because the dollar is weakening, it looks like the currency will also stabilize. So whatever is the market returns that India gives, they will more or less be able to realize that. And for them, the base is very low, right? They can borrow at 1%, 2%. And net net, if they make 6% on that money, it's a great number for them. So even if they make 6%, 7% returns from Indian equity, they'll be more than happy, because their $18 trillion is getting stuck at zero. So I think FII flows will continue for some point in time to emerging market. See, the only risk that all of us must be aware of is that the whole game is currently getting played by the Fed and the central banks. Now, the point is, as long as the central banks have enough leeway, so I can in fact give you, show you one chart. Sorry, yeah, this is the central bank's leeway. So you currently, if you look at it, the balance sheet of Fed is only 43%, while Eurozone is 63 and Japan is 131. So which means the Fed has a long headroom for giving further stimulus. The only caveat is that the inflation shouldn't go up, because what happens when you print a lot of money is that inflation should go up. For the last 10 years, inflation has not gone up in US. So they have clearly told that there are two conditions that they look at. If inflation starts going up above 2%, they will get worried. And if the unemployment rate comes down dramatically low. So it's called an upside down market, where as long as there is bad news, it's good for the markets. But the moment everything becomes good, so let's say the economy recovers, and then everybody starts spending, and then you are looking most likely at a scenario where the Fed might want to start reducing the money printing that they are doing. Because so right now my sense is that what they've projected is that till inflation comes, we all don't need to worry, because they will continue to support the markets. They have a long leg to support the market. So right now inflation is at 1.4%. So it is still not a worry at this juncture. So your view is perfectly correct. As long as the inflation doesn't come in US, we will be looking at a very highly liquid global environment, where FIA flows will continue to be reasonably strong for some point in time.
Okay. Thank you, Arun. The question from Mr. Mayur is like, do you recommend exiting the Motilal Oswal Nasdaq fund?
See, right now we, as a part of our five-finger strategy, we also have the Motilal Nasdaq. See, the point with all these bubbles is that the Nasdaq index, if you really look at it, it's still not reached the 2007, 2000 levels. So that was the earlier bubble which happened in Nasdaq, where a lot of crappy companies were getting. So right now, if you really look at it, the companies are very strong. So if you really look at Nasdaq, 50% of it will go to Amazon, Microsoft, all the major companies, Facebook, and these guys are like very large in such a way that every time there is a new app coming, they can just build that entire app as a feature. So look at what WhatsApp did right now. The day it brings payments, I'm sure the entire Google Pay and all the other ecosystem will go for a toss, because almost everybody has. So these guys are very powerful, and these are not companies which take things for complacency. So I would say calling out a bubble is very difficult, but I would definitely say that if you are already invested in Nasdaq, and don't over allocate to Nasdaq. So unless and if it is below 20%, don't worry too much. But yeah, to precisely call for when it will go down is very difficult. So which is why we broadly say to diversify across. But again, I think emerging markets is also a very decent place to globally diversify. So if you're having 20%, you might also look at maybe putting also some money into emerging market, other economy, because that also fairly looks attractive. But Nasdaq is a very unique case where the companies are actually more global. So it's not really related to US, because Amazon is more like it also has equivalent as an Indian company, as a global company, as a US company. So all these, so it's a very difficult call. To be honest, I don't have a precise view on if Nasdaq is a bubble or not. US markets per se are showing so many signs. But yeah, I would not say to take it off entirely. I would say if you are very uncomfortable, but nothing more than 20% for sure. But if you're very uncomfortable, you can bring it down to 10 and put the remaining 10 into an emerging market basket. Otherwise, if you are okay with some bit of volatility, if at all it comes, then you can continue with a 20% allocation. In our 5-finger strategy, we are yet to reduce the Nasdaq. We continue to have the 20% band, because right now the sense is, as long as the Fed is pumping money, we don't see any major risk on the US markets. But yeah, at some point in time, we might also want to look at emerging markets. Right now, to be honest, I'm still not completely, we've still not made up our mind on the Nasdaq, and because the companies are super strong. That's the only reason why we have the slight confusion with regards to that.
Okay, thank you, Arun. And we have one last question from Mr. Harvinder Singh. His question is, could you suggest safest and effective options to park money in current times for short-term debt funds like Franklin case is in consideration where the money is stuck now?
Yeah, all of our funds, if you really look at it, every fund is almost 100% AAA. We will only have one or two funds with a slightly non-AAA exposure of up to 10 to 15%. And again, those are like very strong names like iPru or ABSL savings fund, which will have some bit. And those again will be like, while it's non-AAA, again there'll be very reputed names like Tata or SBI, or some names which all of us know will where there's the probability of a default is almost zilch, but just because of the some particular category of papers, they're given a slightly lower rate. So all of our funds, if you really look at it, our first priority is in order to protect the downside. So on the debt funds, we don't have any credit risk fund. We don't even have any interest rate risk fund given, because what if interest rates move up after some point in time? That might lead to some more NAV volatility. So currently, if you look at the bunch of funds that we recommend, almost all funds are like super tested for the safety part of it. So there's absolutely no reason to worry about anything like Franklin happening. And even for Franklin, we had started mailing all of our clients almost 3 times. From August, we have been recommending all of our clients to move out, especially the clients who had exposure to that particular fund. It was a case of a credit event, but right now you don't need to worry. Any particular fund that you take from our side, everything is 100% AAA, and we every 15 days the funds publish their underlying holdings. So we look at those holdings on a single line by line item. So it's all absolutely safe. So you don't need to worry. You can pick any of our recommended funds. They're all 100% safe. Just that if you don't want that interest rate volatility also, just stick to the 0 to 1 year band.
Okay. Thank you, Arun. I would like to inform that the questions which are unanswered at the moment will be responded via email. So those who have asked questions related to your portfolio, please write an email to your advisor@fundsindia.com, and the concerned queries related to your portfolio will be answered by your respective advisor. So thank you, Arun, for this informative session on equity markets. And I would like to thank everyone for participating in the session. And there's a lot of appreciation in the chat section as well. So thank you so much for the appreciation. It's been a pleasure to have you all with us. And any service related queries, please drop an email to contact@fundsindia.com. And any questions related to your portfolio, please write an email to advisor@fundsindia.com. And thank you, Arun, and thank you all the participants.
Yeah, thanks everyone to join us on a Saturday. Thank you so much, and yeah, I really appreciate all of you sending your comments on the chat box. Super nice of all of you, and yeah, thank you so much.